a very interesting story in today's Telegraph concerning the issue of the sudden colony collapse of bees across the world, and especially in the UK. Now, there's some facts in there that I never knew. The Manx government on the Isle of Man in 1987 incorporated a ban on importing foreign bees into the Isle of Man, which has prevented the spread of a disease known as Varroa. So therefore, whilst hives all across the United Kingdom have been collapsing due to the Varroa mite spread of the disease, and also due to this sudden colony collapse, all the hives and the queens and the colonies on the Isle of Man have been absolutely healthy. So what's going to be happening over the next few months is that the Isle of Man's 120 beekeepers who only breed and use indigenous Manx bees which have been part of the Manx natural environment for thousands of years, are now going to be exporting some of those queen bees to colonies that have collapsed in the UK to see if they can repopulate and cure those hives infected by the disease. Now, this raises some very interesting issues. Sudden colony collapse itself has been based on the fact that indigenous bee populations have been collapsing deliberately as foreign bee populations have been brought into foreign nations. In other words, because the UK has been importing in more than 10,000 queen bees from all over the world, African bees, American bees, Australian bees, etc., etc., for all this period of time, the actual bee populations that have been set up in the United Kingdom are not those of wild or indigenous bee populations. They're foreign bee populations. So therefore, what sudden colony collapse could be is a form of natural selection whereby foreign and non-indigenous bee populations are collapsing because they are not part of the natural environment within the areas which the bee populations have been put up. So therefore, sudden colony collapse is itself non-indigenous bee populations collapsing because they can't adjust to the environment in which they've put in. But whilst in the Isle of Man, the indigenous and the bee populations which have been on the island for centuries, these are still thriving. These are still happy, productive bees. I think there's a lesson there for everyone, which is that when you destroy an indigenous population and import in an alien population to try and replace them, it doesn't work. And at some point, what will happen is the colony stroke the country will collapse. Now, obviously, I think we can all see where this is beginning to take us, can't we? So there's a lesson there. But I wonder how many scientists and I wonder how many newspapers would turn around and think to themselves, okay, wouldn't it be better to have in a natural environment the bees which have been raised to exist, live and adjust to that natural environment over a prolonged period of time because they evolved there? They will be far more happy and far more productive in those conditions than alien bees imported in by people who only brought them in for profit and who haven't adjusted to the evolutionary conditions in which they're being forced to work. Therefore, sudden colony collapse itself is an indicator of what will happen to multiculturalism. Multiculturalism will collapse, and it has collapsed. The Roman Empire was a multicultural society. It collapsed. Ancient Egypt was a multicultural society and an empire. It collapsed. The British Empire was a multicultural empire and it collapsed. The Soviet Union was a multicultural empire and it collapsed. We all know that sooner or later this pathetic farce of a multicultural society that we're living in will also collapse. So what we can see is a natural model revealing to us what the future is going to be through the scenario of the bee population. First of all, the imported alien bees bring in with them diseases which make them weak and affect and undermine the colonies itself. And then once these weakened bees and these weakened bee populations have these diseases moving amongst them, they spread them to other colonies and other beehives and thereby destroy those as well. And then eventually what happens is the whole colony collapses and that the whole thing goes tits up. I think there's a fantastic lesson there that this country needs to learn. You know, the bees have always been an indicator of the state of the environment. Perhaps we should be looking at them now as also an indicator of the state of the political and social environment. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance. Stay alive.